nutmeg latte. My little dearest bookwormies, how are we doing? Are we coming back up from under the earth because like it's autumn and the rains are falling? It's actually raining today, but I expect you're all out there on the pavement scroggling around. If you're new here, my name is Emma. I don't know anymore, man. I don't know. But every year I do a cozy recommendations video rather. And this year is no different. In fact, this might be one of the coziest lists to date. So I'm really excited. I try never to do repeats and I don't think I have. This is not strictly for like October or Halloween, although it could be, but I just wanted to give you like a little prelude to the spookiness that is coming, because I do have like this ultimate huge list of spooky books that I will be covering, but this list is just cozy, wholesome. There's not a lot of like dark themes here or anything. These are just like nice soothing books for the soul, like this latte, honestly. Book number 1 I recently finished, and I am so happy to be able to give you both an update on this one and a recommendation here, because I really think you should pick up Sipsworth. So wholesome, probably top 10 like most wholesome books I've ever read. I was telling you guys recently that I was reading this and I did finish it and I did love it, and it just did so much for my poor little heart in my chest. Can you see this little mouse here? You might have missed him, and a lot of people probably would miss him, and our main character certainly would miss him in a totally different way, because this is about an 83-year-old woman named Helen Cartwright, and she has come back to England after living abroad in Australia for 60 years with her husband and her son. Those two people in her life are no longer there. They're gone, and so she moves back to England, and she sees both how her country has changed in the 6 years that she's been gone, and she also welcomes very gradually, very incrementally, this small being into her life, and the small being happens to be this little mouse named Sipsworth. She names him Sipsworth. Oh, this book does so much. First of all, so cozy. It's set during, I think, November, leading into the Christmas season in rainy suburban England, and it is just honestly a treat because you get to follow Helen around her daily routine. She definitely at the start of the book, she's someone who's very depressed, very done with life. She's literally just in the waiting room for death, waiting for something to take her. She has nothing she looks forward to, and so when she first sees this stray wild mouse, presumably like it doesn't seem to be a pet, in her house, she goes to the store and she gets some like mouse traps. This is the first moment where she's talking to someone, so even the act of her wanting to get rid of the mouse like is already spurring her into connection with her neighborhood. But gradually she's like, oh my god, no, like what am I doing? I can't kill this tiny creature. And she starts to have all of these revelations concerning both like animal life, which is really no different than her own life, as well as connecting to so many people in her neighborhood. Like she has no friends, she has no one. I can't emphasize this to enough how lonely she is, how alone she is when the book begins. But through this little mouse, she kind of starts to weave and like reach out her little tendrils. She starts to spin this web of connection through Sipsworth. It is so rewarding. This book is wonderful. I loved the writing. There's so much in here about memory, and it also lets you just follow like her day-to-day life, which I find very comforting, like the way that she makes tea, the way that she goes to the store to get her digestives, and I just really like that. On top of it all, it's just really an important book because Helen just became like my hero, because you get to find out so much more about her, and this little mouse opens her eyes to so much cruelty that is going on in the animal world as well. I just love her. I was very surprised at the directions that this book took, and I was so delighted in them. And the book, I think, is partly at least inspired by the author's own experience with a mouse, because during the pandemic he rescued a little mouse. I loved it. And it's so cozy and it's so perfect for the fall. So I also adore this cover. So that is Sipsworth. Next book that I want to recommend to you for a cozy time is a nonfiction collection of botanical folk tales of Great Britain and Ireland. Botanical Folk Tales of Great Britain and Ireland, I think is the proper name. I'm blanking on the author. Feels to me like her name could be Lisa. It could be Lisa. Oh, Lisa, I think it was a German last name. This is a collection, and it's actually split into different seasons that the folktales like pertain to, which I really liked, and they all focus on different plants, flowers, trees, shrubs, and they are so fun. So what the author has done is compiled and kind of like rewritten a lot of different folk tales. Really sweet because all of the tales, like they're not long, it's essentially a collection of like short stories about one specific plant, which I really enjoy. A lot of it either draws on like the mythology that's behind the plant, sometimes it draws on the, like for example, if it's an herb, the medicinal properties or its healing powers or malevolent powers in folktales, which I really enjoyed. What stories have been told about them and how does this actually relate to either what was going on at the time or how the plant was being used or what the plant is doing throughout the seasons. So it was just really, really nice and I highly recommend this one. I've been wanting to listen to this for a while and I actually listened to this when I went to Newfoundland. I listened to this on the East Coast. It was a very nice companion. So that is Botanical Folktales. I would highly recommend you give this a shot if this is up your alley. Next, we have an author who's done a lot of spooky things, and I will be getting into her spooky work this autumn, in October, hopefully. But she's also done a lot of very cozy things, and I had the privilege of reading one of those this year. I wasn't the biggest fan. This was my first work of hers that I had read, but I think a lot of people would really just get a kick out of this, honestly. So I do want to recommend to whomsoever will enjoy it, A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. I was enamored by the first 35 to 40% of this, and then it really dropped off for me personally, so do with that what you will, but this is kind of as cozy as it sounds. It's definitely following the trend of a lot of cozy, like small town-ish, but definitely smaller scale cozy fantasy that is coming out. Think like Legends and Lattes, or there's another one on here that I'm going to recommend that absolutely fits the bill, but Fall for me is really about the cozy fantasy. Our main character is an orphan who works at her aunt and uncle's bakery, and she is known as like a lesser magician or a smaller magician because in this world there are people with magical powers, but they don't have like a wide range of abilities. They just specialize in one thing that they're really good at, and I don't think they have a choice in this. So for our girl, her thing is dough. She has an affinity over dough. She has a certain power and magic over dough. It's her specialty, and so she's really looked down upon because we live in a very military-minded city, larger kingdom, because there are wars like kind of going on in the periphery. Honestly, for most of it, you just get to follow her learning about these like weird conspiracies that are going on in her city of canals, which is essentially like Venice. So I love, if there are any books, if you have any recommendations, please tell me, but I love when cities and fantasy novels are modeled on Venice. She has a familiar because she is, I guess, kind of considered a witch, and her familiar is this sourdough starter named Bob. If anyone has their sourdough starters from the pandemic, how are they going? Can I do a little check back in on this? Bob is very aggressive because he's like been growing for a long time. He's like in this vat and he has such a personality, and I just love that her familiar is literally bubbly, angry, aggressive sourdough. Things start to go awry in her life because there are these people who seem to be taking out and like killing and murdering wizards in the city, magicians, anyone who has an affinity towards anything, no matter how big or small. And so she has to go on this adventure that eventually leads her places that I'm not going to say. The reason I didn't fall head over heels with this book is because I wanted it to stay focused on the smaller, more mundane aspects of her life. I think there is a great trope though in this book of found family and community among the witches and wizards, for lack of, I forget what they call them. It just kind of expanded too much for me and got a bit repetitive in the end. This was my first T. Kingfisher, like I said, so cannot wait to read more from her. I actually have What Moves the Dead on hold right now, which is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher. If you do pick this up, let me know what your thoughts are. Let's keep on with the sweets theme, or like the baking theme, cooking, baking, food theme. The next one is not a fantasy novel, but it does have food at its heart. Specifically, it has sweet bean paste at its heart because the novel is literally called Sweet Bean Paste. This is by Dorian Tsukigawa, if I'm not mistaken. I listened to this year as well. I listened to it on audio. This is a book that also follows kind of an unlikely relationship, just as Sipsworth it's just a love story between a very old woman and a very old mouse. Sweet Bean Paste does something along the same lines in terms of a relationship that a lot of people wouldn't really expect, and certainly a lot of people in this novel do not approve of. Follow this man who I think is in his 30s, who has been released from prison. Since getting out of jail, he's been working at this dorayaki shop, or like sweet bean pancakes, essentially. He works there because his late friend's wife is the owner of the shop and she is allowing him to stay on. So like the dorayaki shop isn't doing great, and he's just kind of, again, like Helen in Sipsworth, living out his life, not doing anything, like not being extremely satisfied, wondering what his purpose is, just feeling quite aimless and doing the same thing every single day. So this changes when this elderly woman walks past the shop, comes up, has some dorayaki, and then she's like, like it's missing this, this, and this. And she basically tells him what he's doing wrong, how he can improve, and he just kind of brushes her off because this elderly woman has very gnarled hands. He's initially repulsed and looks down upon her, both because of her age and appearance. She really wants a job at the dorayaki shop, and so she's like, hey, like, let me work here. And he initially brushes her off. What ends up happening is that she does end up coming to work at the dorayaki shop, and we follow their relationship basically through the beans, like through the sweet bean paste. It's really beautiful. Again, their lives start to expand around them as they learn about each other. They kind of like collect more people into their fold as they're working at this shop. It really evaluates as well like the attitudes that people have towards this older woman. I think she's in her mid to late 70s working at the shop. Like, she is initially stashed like behind the counter. No one is allowed to see her while she works. This also has a subject at its heart that like is not in the synopsis. You don't really know going into it, but it really teaches you about I can't tell you, but something specifically in the context of like Japan and what was going on at the time and how this is affecting both of their lives now. And so you really get to learn a lot about this thing as well, which I don't want to tell you because it was a kind of a pleasant surprise, the direction that this book took as well. So Sweet Bean Paste, really quiet book, very quiet. Highly recommend because this is just sweet, cozy, wholesome. It's about budding friendships. This book I've talked about a lot, I think, recently, so I'm just gonna mention it very briefly. But if you want some Regency era romance in your life this fall, like these are just great because I don't know, all of them, like literally every single one of these books, they're cozy, but then they have a very specific issue or topic that they want to talk about, and I think each of them does tackle it so well. Every time I create these cozy lists, like they all start randomly to relate to one another in a way that I didn't really plan, but the book is half a soul. This also has like a very specific issue at its heart that it talks about. There's a good balance between the romance and the plot in here, so don't worry if you don't want something that is super romance heavy, because half a soul I wouldn't say really is. There's no spice. It's just nice and it just makes you smile. In this book we follow Dora, who was cursed as a young girl by a fae who took half her soul. She was saved by her cousin, who was basically like everything her family wishes she was. At the start of the book, they are going to London to enter the marriage market and like go to all the balls and find a husband for her cousin, and Dora is just tagging along as the very silent, aloof, socially awkward. I think she's such a splendid character. I think everyone in this book was great, even like the villains or whatever. It's kind of one of those ones where the villains are never in these stories really just individuals, and you can't really hate the individual. It's more the system and a bunch of people behind it. If you kind of know, I don't want to give too much of it away, but this is so cozy. Dora, well, she is in London. It's a sorcerer who works for the king, because in this world there are like people loosely know about the fae, but it's not really either a very strong like fae forward book. So if you don't like fae romance or fairy fantasy, that's not really what this is either. It kind of just has splashes of it, which I really like. I really like when things are kind of set in our world with just glimpses into magic and stuff like that. But anyway, she meets the sorcerer who works for the king, who does a bunch of stuff for the king. I don't know, whatever he wants, I guess. His name is Elias. He's also supposed to be very aloof and like too cool for anyone and doesn't want to get married and blah blah blah. But he meets Dora and they just kind of hit it off because they're both quite similar. I thought the pacing was great, and I'm really looking forward to reading more books in this world. I actually have the second one on my shelf, which is called like 10,000 Stitches. Also very Howl's Moving Castle. Please pick up Half a Soul and give it a go if you haven't. Love this. Next, I'm going to recommend to you probably the best young adult book that I have read in a very long time, and also probably ever. I put this book off for so long. I'm assuming a lot of you have already read it, so I'm sorry, but just like, you know, you get to hear about it again because it's the Raven Boys. Wow. This is actually so good. Like, this is actually so good. Every time I return to talk about this book, because I first read this book because of you. Thank you. Bless your stars forevermore. May they shine down on your beauteous, angelic face of wisdom. They don't make them like this anymore. They don't make them like this anymore. I'm actually really happy that I never read this as a preteen or teen and that I got to it later in life, because I appreciated the craft of this so. I can't tell you how good the Raven Boys is. I can't tell you how good it is. I can't tell you how good. I never picked it up as a teenager because my friends at the time told me that I wouldn't like it, and I thought the cover was a little bit cringy, and so I never picked it up. And you guys were like, no, Emma, we know you're gonna like it. This follows Blue Sargent. I think that name also threw me off because I was like, oh, this is gonna be but it's not. Blue, I love you. Her mother is a clairvoyant, and she also lives with like a coven of women who also are clairvoyants and do different things, and they basically give like tarot readings in the town. They look into the future for people in the town, and every year they go to the cemetery. Blue comes with them because Blue does not have these clairvoyant powers. However, she acts as kind of a magnet for the supernatural. So each year they go to the cemetery and they kind of see the ghosts of people who are going to die in the coming year pass through the cemetery. The problem is that this year Blue sees one of the ghosts, which should not be possible, which should not be happening, and she's like, who the hell is that? Turns out it's this young boy named Gansey, who is part of the so-called Raven Boys, because they all go to, my eyes are really tired, do you mind if I just close them? They go to this like very prestigious elite boarding school, and Blue has kind of sworn that she's never going to talk to them, she's never going to get involved with them because they're too like hoity-toity, privileged, prestigious for her. But one day they get involved, and it's so nice. And the writing in this, guys, the craft in this, you get to follow like the 4 Raven Boys plus Blue plus all the women in Blue's life, which is just phenomenal. Sorry, I'm like drooling over this book. Like, it's actually so good. It's actually so good, and I have the full box set now on my shelf. I think I'm gonna reread this, even though I just read this, was it last year? I guess I just read this last year. I didn't even tell you what the main like driving force of this book is, but it's Welsh mythology as well. But like, it's just so, the first book, The Raven Boys, so autumnal, and like spooky parts, gorgeous writing, and so cozy. If you haven't read The Raven Boys, this knocked my socks off, dropped my jaw, knocked my socks off. Told you that I had another cozy fantasy, kind of fantasy romance. I think it is technically classed as a fantasy romance, but I'm currently reading it, and I'm currently about halfway through, and it's not like, there's not a ton of romance so far, but that is The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst. So I am in the middle of reading it. I just started reading it this week, and I look at the sprayed edges, but I saw this on my audiobook app, and then I was like, you know what, that sounds so good that I want to buy it and have it. I am currently listening to the audio. I wouldn't really recommend it because I'm not a fan of the narrator's voice, and yeah, I would just kind of recommend picking it up yourself if you can. Spellshop, first of all, wow. The little blurb says, a lush cottagecore. We've made it, guys. We've made it. Cottagecore, one word, TM, has made it into a book synopsis. A lush cottagecore tale full of stolen spellbooks, unexpected friendships, sweet jams, and even sweeter love. So this is an interesting world, and I keep being like, oh, like what's going on? It's kind of expanding. Here's what I mean. So we follow this girl named Keela and her familiar, I guess, although at the start of the book she's not a witch at all. She's a librarian, and she works in a huge library for the magicians because this library pretty much houses tons of spell books. She lives in the city of Elysium, which is another canal city. At the start of the book, a fire breaks out in the library, and it turns out that it's the revolutionaries, and they're coming to burn down the library because they want like the king out, they want the magicians out. They're not a fan of what's going on in the kingdom, so Keela has to flee with Kaz, her spider plant, which, did I just mention that was her familiar? I forget what I said. Spider plant is her familiar, and he's this very sassy little plant that like trails after her, which I love. I love this trend of like, let's make the familiars weird things. Like, takes a bunch of spell books because in her mind she's like protecting them, but also she knows that she's technically stealing them when she's not allowed to be doing this, because who knows what's going to happen to them. Anyway, she flees on a ship with Kaz and they sail off to the island where Keela grew up. Also, look at these cute chapter headings. So she kind of starts to make her new life there, very Kiki's Delivery Service, because it is a very small town on the Cove. In this town, there are cats with wings. Cats with wings. There are mer horses. There are unicorns. There are centaurs. There's just a lot. There's honestly a lot going on. But she finds out that this town is really, like, her hometown where she was born. She moved away when she was like 9, is not doing well because of a metaphor for climate change, essentially. The magicians in her big bad industrial magician's city have been carelessly using so much magic that it's messing with the environment, and so she's seeing the effects that this change in the climate because of magic, how it's affecting the small town. What is the small town actually called? The town is called Caltray, so it's really affecting the small town, and she kind of starts to fit herself in the town, even though she's like very shy, doesn't have any friends, doesn't want to talk to people. But she starts to make jam, I guess, and sell the jam. So she opens up like a jam shop in the town, and that's where I am. And of course there is her handsome neighbor who keeps popping over doing stuff in her house, which would kind of annoy me because I'm like, I didn't invite you over, I don't want you touching my stuff. But anyway, so far it is really cute. It's really sweet. It's definitely the definition of cozy. The little like end blurb says, like a Hallmark rom-com full of mythical creatures and fueled by cinnamon rolls and magic. I didn't mention that the jam thing as well is just a front for a secret spell shop, because she should not have like these secret spell books with her, but she's gonna sell the spell like recipes and the spells to help the people of the small town. So she's just using the jam shop as like a front. If you pick any of these up, please tell me. If you have a recommendation for me, please tell me. I would love to get one from you, honestly. And yeah, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, please leave me a little pie. Is there a pie emoji? I'm like really craving pumpkin pie right now. Thanks for hanging out in my cozy basement while it rains outside, and I'm really excited to put together for you the next spooky recommendations video, because that is one of my all-time favorite videos to film of the year, are these like seasonal recommendation videos, and that list is huge. Take good care of yourself, have a nice cup of tea or coffee, and yeah, ciao guys.